says, if you don't mind letting Glenn go, he has to drive back to Randolph and keep getting back to work, and I just walk across the street, so.
Well, I guess we want to get him back to work. Sure. So, you ready to roll, Glenn?
Wonderful. Yeah, no, thank you for your time, senators. So I have a couple, just two short slides here. So I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. So thanks again for your time today. So I just wanted to give a very brief introduction to the Vermont Agriculture and Environmental Laboratory. So you can understand what happens in that space and a little bit about our activities. So we occupy a facility that's on the Vermont Tech campus in Randolph Center. So we're fortunate to have a building that's relatively newly commissioned back in 2019 that provides fairly state-of-the-art testing capabilities. So when we think about the Vermont Ag and Environmental Laboratory, there's really kind of two ways to look at that. On one hand, you can focus on the analytical lab. That's our testing capabilities, the stuff that we can do and generate data on that informs a whole host of projects, both from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, as well as the Agency of Natural Resources, as well as the building itself. So the laboratory space itself, which is not only home to the variety of analytical testing labs, but also home to a number of very important programs, and many of which have been represented in the room here, as well as folks from the Agency of Natural Resources, looking at the Department of Environmental, the DEC, as well as Fish Health, also are home to Weights and Measures. So the folks who do all the pump calibrations and maple syrup hydrometers and everything in between. So it's a very collaborative space. It's a very engaging space to be in. And as long as our team is functioning, we're able to do a lot of good work. So just a little bit about the lab and some of the activities that happen specific to the analytical spaces. So we run over 30,000 analytical tests a year. We have a staff of 14 full-time employees, and we're approved with over 100 different testing methods. And so we have a really broad spectrum of testing capabilities. And in each case, we strive to provide quality data. So I'm very proud of the systems in place at the lab that are for quality assurance purposes, meaning that the work that goes into developing the testing methodology to actually running the test and then reporting it out is very defensible. So it's robust, it's reliable, so that data can inform good action. We're a nationally accredited lab. We participate in a number of processes internally and externally that keep us in good standing. So some of the different testing activities that we do on a day-to-day basis at the lab include work with milk and dairy products. So this is everything from product quality as well as consumer safety. So looking at antibiotics, looking at bacteria, looking at pasteurization, looking at milk fat content. So a wide array of parameters, again, from a quality or a safety standpoint. Cyanotoxins, I'm sure some of you have heard about blue-green algae and the impacts that can have on the state from a drinking water perspective, as well as recreational waters. And so this past year, the lab took on responsibilities for testing for the toxins that those algae produce. And it's likely that we'll grow that testing capability here in the coming season. As Stephanie had mentioned before, we do a number of feed, seed, and fertilizer testing. So again, from a label guarantee perspective, making sure that what's in the package is what they say is in the package. So we report those out from the samples. We also take pet food analysis. So any manufacturer who's going to sell pet food in the state goes through a similar label guarantee process. Again, making sure that it's a quality product and that what's on the label, the consumer can rely on that. From a pesticide standpoint, we're very actively engaged with Steve and his team. We participate in two key areas with pesticides. One is our routine analyses, and so these are brought about through specific projects, whether it's neonicotinoid or it's glyphosate but looking at some of the ripple effects, looking at how those are being utilized and where those products are going. We also get heavily involved if there's any misuse investigations. So in the case of a complaint that comes to the agency, we respond, we provide a chain of custody process for the sample so that we have defensible data to either inform that the complaint is valid or to invalidate it. So that's where we get involved. We have tens of thousands of water quality samples that we receive. So virtually any of Vermont's lakes and streams and other bodies of water, we're doing data analyses to inform whether there's phosphorus runoff, other types of nutrients, metals, bacteria, presence or absence of pesticides. So really, again, trying to monitor and inform for keeping our bodies of water safe. And then from an air quality standpoint, we're involved with an EPA testing process that evaluates air quality in all the states. And so for the Vermont state component, we accept those samples and evaluate those for air toxics and heavy metals. And of course, pleased to say we have some very good air.
Where do those samples come from?
So there's
Air quality. Who collects them? And
it's a great question. So we work with the collection partner, Jenny Berschling, and the Agency of Natural Resources. So they do the collections through the mandated processes. There's designated sites throughout the state.
there are designated.
Correct. So they can, it's basically it's year round. It's on I think it's a 12-day schedule. So every 12 days we get a sample in. And so they can get a very accurate picture of quality over time.
And is there a certain time of year that we have better air quality than others, or do you know that?
Senator, that's a great question. I wish I could tell you that off the top of my head. I don't without looking at the data. And typically in this case, this would be data that we're the intermediary. So we would generate the quality data. We give the report to the collector, in this case, Jenny, and then she's able to analyze that and determine how we're doing in terms of our air quality.
Yeah. Seems like like this morning, it was really cold and brisk. Seemed like the air was pretty darn good.
Don't good going lungs.
Brian?
Thanks, Senator. Do you test for DEC? What's your relationship there? Do they ask you guys to test things, or these things that you're all sort of testing, like for ANR? What's that sort of relationship, I guess?
So, Senator, that's a great question. So the lab is run through the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, but in collaboration with the Agency of Natural Resources, which the DEC is part of.
Got it.
So we strive to serve both needs of both agencies.
So are you the lab for the state, for example, the PCBs? You're the lab that we go to. And I guess my other question, we just Senator Starr, a few of us were up at UVM visiting some folks. How do you work with UVM in terms of testing and that kind of thing? Do you do much with UVM?
So, Senator, that's a great question. So there's two areas in which we get involved. From a testing standpoint, UVM right now is handling a lot of the soil testing for agricultural quality.
For you, for your agency.
Well, it's not through us directly, it's for the Vermonters.
Got it.
So that's kind of their area of expertise.
Got it.
And their capacity is developed there for that.
Okay.
So they handle that part of it. The other area where we engage has been with collaboration with researchers and faculty members there. So for instance, there's some work potentially for this coming season with neonicotinoids and how they might move through the soil. And so we're collaborating with a faculty member there at UVM to potentially get some of that testing.
Thank you.
They've done soil tests forever. And through the extension, and it's just stayed there.
We had a great tour, and a lot of it was focused on ag stuff, and it was just incredible what some of the students are producing.
Wonderful.
This committee had a great tour last year of the testing lab.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I see Diane has a question, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair.
All right. I didn't see you up there in the corner, Diane.
I know, I'm stuck in the corner. I can't help it. But thank you, Senator, to elaborate on Glenn's answer around the laboratory and our interactions with ANR, Agency of Natural Resources and Department of Environmental Conservation. When the lab came together, was to be built in statute, it states we'll have an MOU and a lab governance board. So that governance board is made up of members from the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Natural Resources. Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbetts are both involved and alternate as chairing that governance board. So there's a lot of interaction and a lot of discussion. Glenn is in the middle of a strategic planning of trying to figure out what's next. You know, these things keep coming up of PFAS and PCBs and what's coming and what does the lab need to prepare for. So having representatives from both agriculture and the Agency of Natural Resources on a governance board, you know, helping to what's next, if we can tell. I mean, things pop up, but a lot of interaction. The lab was the last to be rebuilt after Tropical Storm Irene. It was washed out in Waterbury, and the first floor was the Agency of Agriculture, and the second floor was the Agency of Natural Resources in that old lab. So it was a legislative decision to combine the two and to have this manner of governance so that it would be a strong interaction of what we're doing and where we're going. So we're still working with the Agency of Natural Resources. They do so many tests that getting the information out that, you know, Vail Lab can do testing and bringing some of those tests that have been sent out in-house, et cetera. So still a work in progress, but a lot of interaction there and a very strong partnership and working hard together to make sure we do as many tests at this laboratory as possible, and you know, sending it out of the, you know, using an outside lab. The state lab has to be, you know, we can't undercut an outside lab. So, you know, making sure we cover our costs, but not, you know, we're not a for-profit lab. So it's a very good partnership and work hard together, and really, I think that's important to put out there, that how much the interaction is going on.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. So, and then just to summarize, and thank you again, Diane, I appreciate the additional history there. But just to summarize a few of the new areas that we're actively engaged in right now, I think one was already mentioned with PCBs and air. So we are the state lab to do that testing specifically to meet the requirement that Vermont State Schools air quality is tested for the presence or absence of PCBs. And so we're actively involved working with ANR on that process. And then, as I know you've probably heard, PFAS is often in the news as a potential contaminant that can be in water, soil, and food. And so having the capacity at the state level to, again, test for that presence at a very low level, parts per billion, is important. And so we've, thanks to some investments that were made in the last legislative cycle, we've invested in instrumentation and staffing that will enable us to jumpstart that process and have that capacity hopefully this year.
So that hasn't started yet, Glenn?
So great.
PFAS testing?
So thank you for the question, Senator. So at this point, we have the instrument necessary, and we have a person who will be joining our team at the end of January to lead our PFAS testing program.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, the PCBs testing it's, I don't know if the standards have changed or what has happened, but we have community after community that is finding themselves in a position where they gotta vacate a building or make plans to leave like a schoolhouse, and that cost is terrific. You know, I made a comment, I don't know, somewheres that JP ski area just sold. And, you know, there's 3 big hotels. There's the water park that costs millions, an ice house for skating, a golf course, countless lifts. And gondolas and that sold for $77 million. And we hear, well, I think Fairfax was the latest one. They're voting on a $37 million renovation plan. Burlington High School, they need 170 or 67 million to replace their high school because of PCBs. And so it's, it's really costing a lot of money to correct problems that went on 20 years ago. Yeah, Irene.
Fairfax is in my district. They just voted yesterday to pass the bond for that renovation. And just to be clear, it is not related to PCBs. It's strictly about classroom expansion.
Okay.
They did test for PCBs. The results came out just in the last couple of weeks. And they are below, they're below the threshold. So that's one school district that's not dealing with PCBs.
That's great.
But yes, they are spending a lot of money to renovate that school for other reasons. Mostly just,
Well,
it's a
they're
popular
growing.
place.
Yeah.
They have too
Usually
much
growing.
farmland up there that's getting converted.
That's one of my issues. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee.
Yeah, well,
Keep the landscape working.
hopefully we can keep what we have going.
Yes, but Burlington indeed, yeah, that's all PCB related, and it's just mind-boggling what.
And we mandated the testing last year, so.
Yes, and they're not the only ones. Thank you.
So, anything else, Glenn?
No, thank you for your time, senators.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
well-
And if there's any follow-up questions, I'm happy.
Appreciate you coming up, and Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the cannabis issue, and I probably should have asked the question earlier. Who tests that? And from what I understood, if you're strictly raising or growing it for fiber, you now can have to register with USDA. I think I heard that this morning. How about if someone's growing it for both? Because there's a THC threshold. So who decides, kind of help me understand that whole scenario, if you would.
Sure, thank you for the question. So I'm probably not the best person to answer it, but I'll attempt to answer it anyway.
Well, I was just asking about the testing more than
Yes, so
anything.
from the testing component, I think, so we have the Cannabis Control Board,
Right,
and they're in their infancy, so they're trying to establish what the testing protocol would look like. So they have an array of tests from everything from heavy metals to the THC level, the potency,
Yeah.
to the bacteria and the molds. And so they're developing what that process would look like. And then our lab potentially may get involved to serve some of those testing needs. But it's a question of having the capacity to do that at this point.
so we don't test at the moment. We send it out of state.
So at this point, we did do testing this past season, but specifically with hemp. And this was strictly from a sort of the trust and verify approach of, we have a hemp sample, is it truly hemp, or has the THC level gone to a point that it's cannabis? So we did do that testing within our organic section. And again, I think the challenge has been internally, while we'd love to grow our testing capacities to meet that need, but right now we've prioritized work with the PCB and air testing and the PFAS testing. And in terms of the chemical needs, these have all originated from our organic section. So it's really an active growth area in terms of testing needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions for Glenn? So, thank you, Glenn.
Yep, thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you need to leave,
Much appreciated.
hopefully, maybe this year or next, we'll get down and visit the lab in the college, and we'll stop in and see you.
We'd love to see that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So, it's almost your.
Saving the best for last.
Well, still got Diane.
I can't share. For some reason it says you did.
I just put you as co-host, so try again and see if that works.
Right, well, let's move forward. And so I want to invite and welcome you to introduce Nina Gage here. I, for the record, am Laura DePietro, I'm the director of water quality and I've been doing this for a while now, maybe a decade. But Nina, it's new, so I'll let you just introduce yourself real quick.
Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
Same here.
My name is Nina Gage. I grew up in Rocky County, Brandon, Vermont. My folks are still there, and I studied at University of Vermont in Bachelor of Environmental Science, Environmental Studies, from Rudenstein School of Environmental Natural Resources. A lot of my backdrop in school was around social science work, so I'm very interested in the behavioral aspects of our work in terms of changing the culture of what farms look like in Vermont. I've been working for the Water Quality Division for the past 6 years behind the scenes. So I am both nervous and excited to be here with you today, but I look forward to assisting you with your needs throughout the session and in collaboration with Laura. So thank you for having us today and the opportunity to introduce a little bit about our programs.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I know we've gone through this a lot in other committees, but certainly give you a high level of sort of what we do. And then, you know, as the session goes on, or we expect we'll come in for specifics of what you need. But generally, what the Agency of Agriculture does in water quality, because that's what we're doing obviously in our division, is we deal with non-point source. And so there is, the way it's set up is DEC does the point source work. And they are required to have us do the non-point source work. And there's an MOU, and we work together and collaborate in that space. And so we have the majority of inspectors, we have the grant programs, we have all of the work to do the water quality agricultural efforts. And when we find something that is so significant that it might be a point source, we have to send that over to DEC. And so we have a process with that. And we can explain more over time as that comes up if there's questions, but that's generally what we do. So we do education and outreach. The bulk of that is put to our partners. So the clean water budget is the majority of our budget, and we take that money and then we move it to partners. So folks like UVM that you went to visit and conservation districts, they take those funds and they run programs. So for instance, like the UVM we've outsourced the custom manure applicator. So every farmer who hires a custom manure applicator can ensure that that applicator has been trained and understands the regulations so that when they're applying manure on their farm, they should be doing it by the rules. And farmers also have to get education as well. There's a requirement for that. So they run those programs to have these opportunities so that people can access them. But of course, we do our own education and outreach as we need to about our programs and practices. We inspect and enforce on farms, and this is the majority of work that we do. We have 2 office locations, and I know a lot of folks are remote, but we do have our Williston office is near the, is it Restore? I can't remember it's called anymore. It used to be Goodwill, but it's right behind there, and it's actually the USDA office there. So there's a nice collaboration with Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. But that is where our staff are located that do all of this regulatory work, and also our engineering technical work is there in that office. And then in Montpelier are the folks that basically move the money, right?
Yeah.
So we go and visit farms. So we broke farms down into categories, and the large farms have, for us, they have an individual permit. So we have a little more scrutiny on them, and we visit them a lot more often. So we visit them every year. And this is all in statute that we have to do this. The medium farms, we visit them every 3 years. And then the certified small farms, that's a relatively new category. It came out of the Act 64 of 2015, which is basically anybody with 50 or more cows, if you think about it in the dairy world. So we inspect them every 7 years. But of course, any one of these farms, the moment we step on their farm, and if they have any issues, we don't disappear for 1 year or 3 years or 7 years. They become part of our regular cycle until it gets resolved, and then they go back into that cycle as necessary. So we do a lot more visits, and we'll show you some data about all of this, but that's predominantly what we do.
Is that my neighbor up there?
It might be, yeah. Right down the road in the south. Yeah, so we inspect production areas, we inspect the fields, we walk around every single thing in the production area, like a silage bunk or a manure storage. We walk every ditch as far as we can walk. So we spend a lot of time getting a lot of miles. it is the one service we offer, is we allow people a budget to buy boots, because we know that there is nothing more valuable than a good warm pair of boots when you have to spend your entire day outside walking for very many miles. So, and then these technical financial assistance programs, the kind of things that they do, these are just photographic examples, which, oh good, you don't see what I see. You see on the left, that's a cover crop. And so we have a lot of money that comes into the agency, and farmers do a lot too. We'll show you the data about that, to help plant that. And then, you know, the two middle pictures here, grazing is another area that, you know, has increasingly been, it's always been something Vermont has done, right? But as far as the cost share programs, we've been trying more and more to develop the space there. And I will tell you admittedly, the Agency of Ag doesn't have a staff position who is a grazing specialist, right? UVM Extension generally does that work. We help them, for instance, have a position so that they can go and do this work. So we move the money to make sure that people have, you know, if they need watering tubs or fencing, laneways, et cetera. But that is one space where there is a gap out there in terms of the capacity to service.
So that's the organic, a lot of organic.
Not necessarily just, it's more than organic. I mean, all heifers are generally on pasture if they can be on a farm, right? At some level. So there's a lot of farms still have absolutely a component of pasture.
Have you done any testing on fields that where the animals are out loose, you know, out pasturing, and farms that confine their animals? Do the soil tests run any different? You know, the cows are out there punching little, it's wet, they're making little marks in the soil to retain water, and they're pooping, and you know, that is there any difference in what happens to soil?
Yeah.
between-
I'm not gonna be able to answer your question holistically because it depends on every farm. But if you were to grab a research paper that described what each farm was like, then I think you could respond to that. And, you know, Heather Darby is definitely a great one to ask. She has been taking a lot more soil health tests. So we don't take soil health tests as a regulatory requirement, right? So we don't do any soil testing. We require it by the farms, but they're only required to get nutrient analysis. So they're not required to get soil health or water capacity, organic matter.
We're gonna have to maybe start doing more soil testing if we're gonna, you know, produce papers supporting what Ryan is doing.
And that effort is doing that. And so again, there's a number of tests that have been done in the state, and generally what they found is, you know, Vermont actually does really well because we are a manure-based state, right? Midwest, they're not manure-based agriculture, and in Vermont we are, which as a resource into the soil, it actually creates good organic matter and water retention. So, but defining whether pasture or even just regular hayland or cropland would be differentiating, I think it depends on the management of the pasture, right? Stocking density and all those other things. So it all depends. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Of course, I live on the farm I grew up on, and remembering, you know, when we used to do the hay, and then you would pasture, or you would let the fields grow up, and the cows would, and they would, you know, make little holes in our earth with their feet, hoofs, and then you would have rain. And, you know, they would poop in them fields, and the rainwater and everything else would run down through and get when those hoof prints. And it just seemed like the hay and the next year would be good. But now if you don't fertilize those fields, because the cows are gone and there's no cows in there punching little holes in the soil to let the water in with, you know, you still get some, but it's different. And I don't know, that's just, you know, visually seeing things and wondering about things.
Yeah, so again, UVM might be able to answer your question a little better than I can because they look at that type of data and information and have analyzed it pretty extensively.
Maybe conservation districts, do they do anything like that?
They're usually partnered with UVM, so I think UVM would be a good source to go to.
Yeah.
And the picture on the right is our capital equipment assistance program. So we have been given money. We do a little around $1 million plus or minus a year to help farmers buy equipment that does a next level innovation into the farm field. So,
That's
right,
injection, right?
that's an example. Yeah.
Seeing that leads back to the hook marks in the, you know, in
It's
the
just
soil.
mechanical.
No, you're
right.
That rig goes down through and makes little scratches in the soil.
So this specific equipment, it's called a grassland shallow slot manure injector. It's produced by, it's actually out of the Netherlands where this technology's come from. It injects manure shallowly below the soil surface. It's specifically designed for hay and forage-based fields. Typically, if you're injecting on a hay or grass field, you're going to see pretty substantial impact to your hay crop. So hence, a lot of farmers for a long time were really resistant to it. This technology has created a pathway for manure injection on hay fields where we, you know, in Vermont, a very large majority of our agricultural fields are in perennial systems and grass or hay. So it's provided a new opportunity. We've developed a few of these systems across the state to support farms both through like individual farmer agreements as well as cooperative and sort of extension or conservation district supported shared equipment.
Has that been running long enough to determine if you get a better crop off a field that this injector system has gone through than say a regular mechanical manure spreader's gone through?
I don't know the details of the comparison studies, but I know that we supported UVM Extension a couple of years ago to look at some of the impacts. Unfortunately, the years of study were impacted during a drought year, so some of the initial results were not ideal, just considering the drought conditions of the season. And that was work that Kirsten Workman had taken on. She's recently left her position at UVM. So I have to check in with them on where things landed in terms of research, but it's still pretty new. It's a new technology, but folks are excited about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then we also have our biggest program as far as the amount of budget dedicated towards it is what we call our BMP, Best Management Practice. And so these are just before and after examples. This is the capital infrastructure going in on farms in production areas, so concrete and whatnot. But we don't buy barns as an example, but we may help create a barnyard to control runoff and then have that directed into a manure storage, so that way then it can be appropriately land applied through a nutrient management plan. Or in the lower one, help a laneway where animals, because they're going in and out for milking every day, multiple times a day, that impact can really build up. And so trying to help make it reinforce so they can come through and scrape it and manage the material. And we have engineers that help design that work. We also work with NRCS, which is the federal partner, and we have shared engineers as well. So we will work to create or, use each of our budgets to be able to make sure we get this work done.
So those are gravel packs or those that's concrete?
They're concrete in this particular.
That's like for a barnyard or feeding area.
Well, and this is clearly near the barn, much more heavier used area. They're probably going to stand there and aggregate before they go into milking. But you're correct. If we were out, moving them out to pasture, for instance, it would likely be more of a gravel base. We don't build concrete highways for animals to get out of pasture. And everything we do is, least cost, best practice. So.
Yeah, that's kind of a muddy place there that before you concrete it.
And get appropriate drainage and get the, so the roof water doesn't any longer come through there. It can be drained outside of it so it doesn't get wasted.
Yeah.
And make more volume of waste. We want to try and reduce the volume of waste that we have to manage. So this part, I'm really, really excited because I think Nina has done an amazing amount of work over the last couple of years. We've come to you and we've reported things over time, right? And there's always those questions of what are you doing with our resources and how are farmers doing in terms of implementing things? And we can give you paper reports, but they're just not as fun, to be honest. And so this is an interactive space where this is the first time it's being shown to anyone. So you are getting, you are the first opportunity to see this. And so we've been able to take all this data with new staff and resources that we've had over these last couple of years. We've been hiring some really intelligent folks, which has been great because they've got all these skills and capabilities. to retool how we manage our data and put it into this website that you can interact. So we were able to go back in time too and look at a little bit of data. We haven't gone all the way back in time. But at least since, mostly Act 64 and looking at what has happened since then. The other thing is, as far as, trying to share this data, we share a lot of this data with DEC. So that was also part of why we had to put a lot of this data together. And then we realized we could build this additional tool. So one of the things Nina does with her whole team is make sure that we get all of our data gathered each year, do the quality assurance on it, and then send it over to DEC. And then DEC has separate reporting mechanisms to do the whole clean water effort, right? So what we're showing you today is just ag, and it's put into the way of looking at it that for us makes the most sense. So I will go ahead and let you drive for a little bit. Wonder if it'll 100% still presenting. No, don't fail us now. No, yeah.
So as Laura mentioned, we have invested a pretty considerable amount of time and energy to build what I like to think of as our foundational measurements and metrics. Some of these are developed in collaboration with the Department of Environmental Conservation through their Clean Water Initiative program because they're used across sectors. And some are crucial for us in terms of strategizing better ways to approach a region of the state or a specific practice that we're not seeing the level of implementation that we'd like to see. At the same time, I truly believe that data should drive our decision making. So we're really excited to show you a little bit about this. Again, it's a sneak peek preview. Our official report will be published on the website for Sunday. That's our annual report on technical and financial assistance in our programs. We apologize in advance for the acronyms, but just let you know that the initial page of this has a reference point for our assistance programs, as well as key terms that might be utilized throughout this report if you get confused between programs. If you select the center of the screen, it provides a table of contents. We have about, I think, 12 or 13 individual pages. The second page is instructions. So this is a great quick reference if you're unsure of how to click through. But basically the idea is to provide the people with access to the data in terms of understanding the trends that we see across the state.
So Scott, you go way back to 16 then.
So in some cases, we have data in place since Act 64 came about, Act 2015. That was sort of the impetus to begin some of these tracking systems. The first pages are both tactical basin maps and county-based maps. It gives you the ability to filter through to look at investments. When you see a filter adjacent to a figure, it means that that figure is based on data in that instance. So in this case, I'll filter for 2022, and you can just see the rate of both investment, acreage or conservation practices, and associated phosphorus reductions from those conservation practices. Just as a general point of information, the state at this point in time can estimate phosphorus reductions in the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog watersheds only.
Is that 22,857? Oh, kilograms.
Kilograms of
Okay.
phosphorus reduced as a result of agricultural conservation practices on the landscape. Also on Sunday is the Clean Water Investment report will be due, and you'll be able to see the comparison of how agriculture is performing in terms of the other sectors. But in the past few years, agriculture's come in around 95% of the total estimated phosphorus reductions occurring in the state of Vermont.
You mean we're doing
Pretty well.
whatever's being done, we're doing?
Yeah.
Agriculture is an incredibly cost-effective mechanism of reducing phosphorus runoff.
So those colors on your maps, like up near, looks like Swanton, Franklin County, is that a heavy phosphorus area that where maybe more has been extracted, or?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. It's a great question. In general, the maps in this report are you're going to see a higher concentration at a darker color. So typically You know, we have a lot of reductions that need to happen in both of the Siskoy, South Lake, and Otter Creek basins. So you're going to see a pretty significant investment and, you know, general work in those areas. I'm going to breeze through this as best I can and just let you know that the goal is that this will be at your fingertips if you need to look at information in the future. In general, since fiscal 16, our division has supported about $41 million in investment. In fiscal 22, we had about 12.2 million in investment. One of the points I'll just, you know, bring up since fiscal 16, when this data tracking system was put in place, about 40% of our total project cost has been in the form of match. So our programs play a pretty crucial role in leveraging federal funding to the state of Vermont for projects to happen. And what that means is a farmer may not have the funding to support the whole project. So the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, the USDA, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, will provide sort of the majority of the funding for a project, and the state will come in and assist so that we can get that project in the ground. Otherwise, the farmers are sort of faced to, you know, walk away from the project because they can't afford cost-wise. So yeah, we play a very crucial role in terms of bringing additional projects to Vermont, additional federal funding. In terms of actual conservation practices being implemented on the ground, cover crop is one of our largest sort of conservation practices that we're supporting and assisting farmers to adopt, both increase their adoption rate of and improve their implementation of. You'll see sort of a little bit of a dip in fiscal 22 practices and associated phosphorus reductions. And that part of that is just, you have to understand that at the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, we still have a variety of active projects happening and reporting processes happening. So next year, you'll see that number increase slightly when we're able to capture the data, do the geospatial mapping associated with all these programs, and then see the data before it's brought into our reporting processes.
So what are the colors are there over on the side, so we can track what the different colors mean?
Thank you, Senator. Great question. If you hover over any aspect of this interactive data report, it will provide you with both the sort of topic area and an associated metric with it. So in this case, we had over 85,000 acres of cover crop supported through our programs. It's about 40% of all practice acreage that we have been supporting through state funded programs. Another important caveat to acreage and phosphorus reductions is that we are looking in this graphic at state supported efforts. The federal government, United States Department of Agriculture, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and generally programs under the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they contribute significantly to conservation in Vermont. And those metrics are not incorporated into this report. This is
just
solely state funded aspects. So Laura mentioned in the beginning that our education outreach to the agricultural community is a key piece of our work. Sometimes that's in the form of an event, right? It's a workshop at a local farm that can invite neighbors to come and see a best management practice like an impact manure system, how that works, so that they can have the opportunity to ask questions and potentially implement a similar practice on their own farms. And sometimes an event might be a stakeholder meeting to pull people together and get input on a new program. We also support visits to farms. Again, as folks may know, a lot of farms tend to live in rural areas. They may not be as connected to things that are happening. So our ability to be on farms is really crucial to connect farmers with state and federal programs and resources and or knowledge about regulations that may be applying to them. This includes both technical visits provided by UVM Extension under our funding programs, as well as our staff on farms. I'll have Laura speak a little bit about this, but we also have some data on production areas inspected for farms.
And one thing I'll say, so the partnership and the way that we get this data, at some level to their frustration, I'm sure. But in order to give the money to people, we ask them to report this stuff back to us, right? And so it's a requirement in the granting, and we've set up these ways that they can electronically get this information to us so that we can get it into this method. But I think they're all, you know, in the first couple of years, it was probably tougher to adapt and change. The other thing we have that helps get some of the data out is we have, we talked about it years ago, and it's continued to flourish, which is great. We have I'm pretty sure we're the only state in the United States of America that has a partnership database where multiple agricultural entities all work within that database. And we started building it with the USDA. Unfortunately, USDA has privacy and challenges, right? So they were hopeful at the time when Vicki Drew was the state conservationist that they could make it work, but lawyers had other thoughts about it. So they can't participate. They can look at it, but they can't put their data in it. But still at the same conservation districts, UVM, anyone we give a grant that's in this MOU between all the partnership to say you will respect how this data is managed and you will put it in. And we also have created barriers where like folks like myself, because I'm a regulator, right? Like I look at everything and I'm thinking regulation. I can't access it, right? I can look at it and get aggregate data, but I can't. So what's going on Senator Campion's farm? You know, like I can't do that.
Can't, or you mean it won't show you? Or?
I don't have login access. There's actual controls in the data so that my access cannot get me there, right?
You
so
could tell me, may I ask a question? You could tell me how many farms were fined last year.
Well, it doesn't have that kind of data in it.
Okay.
It's all partner type data, you know, visits and work that they did with them. So it's a way and a mechanism to be able to say, if you imagine a bunch of non-regulatory folks working with farms out there, UVM, conservation districts, they could look up a farm and say, well, who was there last? What were they working with them on? Who should I see this problem here. It looks like this other person's already been working with them on that. I'm going to give them a call because I think they need help, just like getting that next piece of paper and process and getting into the program, et cetera. So it's a way to just connect people to help make sure everything just keeps moving in the right direction. And so it's really for like work on the ground and conservation planning. We have a separate database, which we're in the process of building, which is where I can answer all those questions that you have about how many enforcement actions and who and whatever. And that data is, you know, it could be very specific. You could ask about a specific farm. We do have a policy internally where we said, not until the farmer gets the enforcement action do we like to share that because we'd like them to know first. But once it's been mailed and received, we use that, you know, green card certified mail, then it's a public record that we're happy to share.
So I just want to understand the process, because I think this is pretty innovative. It's only the non-regulatory entities that have the login. Is that what you're saying?
We have different access logins. So like I have a, I'll just call it a regulator login, right?
Yeah.
And other folks like UVM Extension have a full access login.
Okay. But the farmer, I don't want to speak for the farmer because I don't know. I assume if I were a farmer, I might feel a little better about knowing that you can't see some stuff.
That's the plan. It's like, it's about building comfort. And again, we really did intentionally build it to get USDA in there because we knew USDA, we are not allowed to share that data, period, if we ever get it, right? And so we knew there were federal requirements. And so we built it for that. And there's still hope. Maybe they can come in, right? Maybe some new lawyer will have a different vision, but that is the focus as well, is that people can talk to farmers and say, it's okay. Like, I see you have a problem. I'm glad you called me. We can help you and we can get you to get a solution in place.
I would think it would tend to make it more legitimate and accurate too.
And we can have data now to talk about what's going on out there. How many people are accessing them? What type of programs do they need? That kind of thing.
See it, we've had reports in the past that a lot of farmers will call their conservation districts to go in and try to oversee the whole operation to see where they're in compliance, not, and they try to get fixed up before Laura gets there. And so that they don't get into trouble. But you can go, you can have an inspector go and not necessarily the farmer be in trouble, right?
Well, if there's
They're
something
given
wrong.
a certain, but aren't they given a certain length of time to try to get things back up to order so that when you go back in 60 days or 90 days or whatever it is, that they are in compliance?
So there's different levels of enforcement. We generally, in statute, it says if agency of ag finds somebody has a problem, we have to tell them what their problem is. So the first method, most typically, is a corrective action letter, which you get 30 days to respond back to us and say what you're going to do. And it's basically, we approve, sometimes there's an interim plan, sometimes there's a long-term plan, but we say, yep, that might work. Or we say, nope, try again, send us another letter, please. But that process is meant to, there's no penalties associated with it, and it's meant to create a compliance schedule and get the process done. So it is a lighter weight level of enforcement, so it starts there. But then if they don't do whatever they said, or they don't respond, or whatever, then it can move up. And the next step is typically a penalty from there.
Yeah.
So this page is our enforcement page, and it sort of gives you an understanding. We didn't break it out by the type of enforcement action. Majority of our actions are corrective action letters, but notices of violations are more and more common. And admittedly, they're probably more and more common on the medium and the larger farms, because we've already been regulating them for so much longer, doing inspections, that if you've been noticed about something once, we have 7 years that if you have to have that problem come up again, that means you'll probably go to notice of violation. So there's sort of a 7-year limitation on coming back into understanding. So you can see, our enforcement actions have absolutely gone up over time. I think a great part of that is the capacity, right? When we first started doing water work, we didn't have resources, and really Act 64 of 2015 gave us some capacity to be able to do this work. And so you can see after 2016, the workload has significantly been able to not only do more inspections, but it's just this idea, like if there's more cops on the road, sometimes I guess it tends to everybody slows down, but you end up potentially getting caught, more likely to get caught.
Like where your graph goes up to 80, 87, 82, 101.
Yeah.
Those are enforcement actions.
Which is encompassing of all the types of actions.
If you went back and, I bet if you went back and checked, see, most of that's on dairy farms, I presume. And if you went back and checked milk prices, that's when they were probably getting $15, $16 a hundredweight, and they had no money. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but it would bear looking at, because those years in there, we had like 5 really bad years. And I bet that some of the.
In these years, we had about 4 inspectors, right? In these years, we have about 11. So we doubled capacity.
Oh, so you had a lot more inspectors.
A lot more
too.
inspectors.
So they could drill down.
we could visit a lot more farms. And what we also started doing in this space, so in this group, in the prior years, if I were to jump up to the graph up here, this bar chart.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Let me take you to production areas inspected. This data doesn't go back because this is coming from our new database that really, we just haven't had the capacity to go back in time and key in all the old data. So this will be a going forward, and as we can get to it, we'll get information going backwards. But what we used to do based on having 4 people, right, and trying to regulate all these farms, was we couldn't get to every facility each year. So an individual permitted farm, for instance, like a large farm might have 9 facilities that they have animals at or manure storage at. Once we got the capacity and staff, we changed all the protocols and said, go everywhere and do everything, right? And so that's one thing where if you look at this top chart here, the orange as an example is large farms. So our acronyms are certified small farm, large farm, medium farm. Non-RAP are farms that are lower than what the RAPs regulate, and then small farms are very small farms that are regulated by us that don't have to certify with us.
Under 50.
Yeah. But you see how big of an area we have in terms of the amount. So this is like when we look at a production area, again, it's the infrastructure typically is what this is looking at. So there's more infrastructure sites that we're going to on large farms versus these other size farms. So, while there may only be, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, I want to say like 39 large farms, like there's well over, there's 200, I guess we'll just give you the total. Well, that year we inspected 113 facilities, right? So
Between medium and large.
no, just large. So, so while we may not have that many, it appears certified, or I'm sorry, permitted farms, there are actually multiple farms associated with individual permits. And you can see this is the actual acreage, so a production area and the size of it, right? So as the farm is bigger in size, typically the production area is also, square footage acreage bigger. And so you can see large farms, of the inspections we do, that the majority of the area that we walk and look at is the area of a large farm. I can't remember why I was taking you there.
What, the one on top is a small farms? The blue.
The
or
littlest is
green?
the blue, those are the small farms.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
they
basically,
don't have much acreage either.
no, and yeah, we want to show the compliance one.
Yeah.
So what we also track is just how compliant are these things, right? So one of the things we have to do for TMDL tracking is trying to figure out how to quantify. We do all these inspections, what are we finding, right? And so if you look at this bottom chart here, percent compliance by fiscal year reported. So this is each year. This is the blue is compliant and the orange is not compliant. And it's slight, admittedly, but there is an increase in compliance going on, which is good. This breaks it down up here by farm size. Certified small farms are the most compliant. But one thing to be noted about this is the caveat of data. Again, like if they're compliant when we visit them, we may not be back there for 7 years. So in the interim, we may not know if they've changed things and they're no longer compliant. To where like the large farms, again, we're there every year.
Yeah.
So this is a lot more intense data to say that 69% are compliant. So while the data shows that certified small farms appear to be more compliant, the data behind it isn't as rigorous likely as the larger farms because of the volume of inspections.
Thanks, Chair. So I just want to, so it's 30% roughly since, and I may be misreading this, since 2019 to 2022 of farms that aren't compliant.
Yep, when we go there, they're not compliant.
So I imagine these are these repeat offenders, sort of, what are you seeing there? Or is it, gosh, you're not compliant and you're just popping up? Tell me a little bit more about the data.
I don't know if I could like pare down the
Yeah.
data specifically, but I'll just tell you our process, right?
Yeah.
So this is a sense of, we inspected X number of farms.
Yeah,
Of those, how many did we have like a clean bill of health?
yeah,
That's the blue box.
that's the blue box.
So the
Yeah,
ones that we didn't have a clean bill of health, those are the ones where we assess it and, majority of the time it gets referred to enforcement and is dealt with enforcement. Every once in a while, we will do a programmatic follow-up and say, well, you were missing a soil test,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, yes, you fall in that category, but the reality is,
one little thing.
it's just like a small thing, like we may not enforce on you on, we might just, what we call them is programmatic follow-ups, and so we schedule those and
Okay.
track those and make sure that someone follows up and that they are compliant. And if they're not at that point, then they would get referred over to enforcement. So,
The important thing to look at there, though, I think, is that you got 70% of the large farms, that's large farms you're showing, that are in compliance, and 30% are so-so. But if you look at the acreage and the number of animals, if you back up to the slide before, that's where the majority of the land is and the cows are. And so if you took a percentage of the total acreage and the percentage of the total animals, those numbers might be a lot higher that are in compliance.
yeah, and I mean, you can look to,
See the little, see the where the numbers are?
you can see the enforcement actions by year too. The majority of actions, are on medium farms, actually, interestingly enough, because those farms, this is just a personal opinion based on what I've
You
seen.
don't get any.
But the large farms have figured out had used the programs, invested in things. They are buying more smaller farms, and so they get those farms pretty quickly up to speed. Like they know the system, they know the drill with us, and they are, you know, generally responsive. The medium farms, they sort of have been in this category where I think if you look at the financials, they're more stressed than any other group. And so the
What's that,
ability.
medium? Did you say medium?
Yeah,
Medium.
yeah.
Yeah, they're cotton, you know.
It's either you get big or you go out. And so, and if you look at some of the data, that's the group that we've lost the most of, is the medium farms. And so, you know, the compliance on those is a little more challenged, is a little more nuanced in terms of trying to get to that end goal. And oftentimes a lot of the actions that we end up taking, they are associated with them not paying the annual certification fee, right? So if you, like in some years, you know, we'll have 30, 40 of them that didn't pay. And so it's like those go, we send notices, but like, so that kind of stuff falls into this data as well. So it may not always be about a water quality issue as much as, you know, essentially they owe us money for an annual fee. So we could tease that stuff out more, but that I think is why the medium farm category comes up more into these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be helpful to tease it out at some point, and maybe the report itself, you know, if somebody said to me a third of our hospitals weren't compliant, you know, we'd all be panicked, we'd all say, hey, let's fix this situation. A third of our school, you know, so it would be helpful to better maybe understand what's happening there.
Sorry, we just lost
Yeah.
internet.
That's okay.
Like completely lost internet. But anyways, we don't have to go through it more in terms of that, but
Yeah, we still gotta get EB and Diane on for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, they can come back another day.
We lost internet in here one day
Yeah.
last week also. I don't know if,
so I'll just say a couple more things if you don't mind, if I can do it without internet. So I just want to show you that. So thank you for taking time and checking it out, and you can poke around more.
Very
now.
excited that you're excited about it.
thank
Yeah.
you
But
for
the
doing
sort
it.
of hot spots are areas that have been kind of going on since the last time we were here at this building. Waste importation on farms has been a really big discussion in our space, right? Because there's the universal recycling law, so no more food scraps can go to the landfill. But there's still this challenge of, you know, what is a clean food scrap? What is a good thing to bring onto a farm? And so what we have right now currently is the authority to regulate based on nutrients, not based on trash, right? And so we've been trying to have conversations and try and learn, or about PFAS, right? Imports. What we want to make sure, and what we don't have the space to do this outwardly, but is that we keep our farmland clean and that where we grow our food is healthy and safe. So that's a space where we've been working a lot with DEC and trying to navigate and understand it, but it's certainly a very much increasing pressure on farms because there's no place to take that stuff. And farms, you know, it can be recycled. There's absolutely clean waste that can be recycled and put onto farms, but there's been a DPAC committee that got set up last year, which you may remember from bills that passed, and you know, that is a big part of the conversation. Certainly is. There's a lot of plastic that goes into that initial stuff that's not so
It's
separated.
dirty. I mean, our big issue is cleaning it, right?
Well, they essentially auger and grind it and then try and separate the flows. But there is still a plastic contamination rate. And as we know, unfortunately, a lot of our food does already have PFAS in it from some of the packaging that is put into it. I know there's efforts to try and reduce that, but it's tough. And so we're just trying to make sure that farms don't become the recipient of our society's waste, such that then some future we don't have good space to grow food.
Are there other states that have dealt with this ahead of us, so that how are they handling it, or better management of it, or are there
there's
samples?
definitely, I mean, this is a topic and more you're seeing it in headlines. I just actually went to visit Maine and talk with their agency of agriculture over there. They have gotten ahead of us on PFAS and managing it in that space. But as far as depackaging, they're not aware of it, right? But Massachusetts has a lot more depackaging, and New York does as well. And they've raised concerns, but they haven't necessarily figured out, again, a solution. California as well, of how to deal with it, because we make a lot of waste. We're really good at that as humans, and trying to process it and manage it and to reduce the landfill impact. It's all balanced. And so there is no silver bullet at this point that anyone has identified.
Will landfills take that white plastic? I mean, can you take it to the landfill?
Well, so like if you have food in a package that you had a huge batch, right, like a truckload of a batch of that something, it didn't fill all the way, or it's a little off spec, or you've got the wrong ice cream in the wrong container, right? Like whatever,
Yeah.
whatever happened, instead of manually opening and separating all that food from the container packaging, this is the technology that is available and has been used, is just to sort of smash it, right? And hope that whatever the product was
We
in it
went
will go
through
out.
that last year.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Chittenden County, they got a
Yeah.
D-pack.
Yeah, there's one in Vermont. And so that stimulated a lot of the conversation of and UVM's doing research on how much plastic gets into that, just to try and understand what this is, because
It's tough, isn't it?
it is. So that's one, again, it's a pressure that's been coming to us. We've been trying to keep a focus on narrowing it to a few farms versus having it be a lot of farms. But again, we don't have the authority to regulate plastics or PFAS or contaminants like that. We have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and how much storage volume of a farm has.
I think, instead of working like some other committees work in this building, I would want to have an alternative in place to require, farmers to switch to before, just saying, okay, as of 2025, there's no more white plastic snowballs gonna be seen in Vermont. We better have an alternative figured out what they can use in the place of the plastic, because we know that it's gonna lay in wherever they dump it, in the landfills or wherever, it's gonna be there
Ever.
it'll take a lot of years for it to, whatever happens to it.
And Canada's doing some research too, because some of this can the plastics can actually go into the plants as well, if they're micro enough. So we're gonna learn as much as we can, but that's a space that it's been quite a year learning lots about that. And the other thing is farm determinations and what is a farm. We never actually even had a process to do this. It was just farming. Everybody's farming. And now you've got Act 250 asks lots of
He's a
questions.
farmer.
I've got 25 chickens in my farm.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
he's
and
It depends.
to your
Right.
point, what has started to happen is, so we said that, and all due respect, I mean this in the nicest way, but like backyard.
No,
farming,
yeah.
Right, was no longer in the RAPs, right?
Yeah.
Because municipalities can't regulate farming as it is defined in the RAPs. And the RAPs, we said, you know what, the backyard farms have taken a lot of our energy and we know we have to do this big water stuff. So we carved that out. But what's starting to happen is municipalities are making regulations to tell people they can't have chickens. And so everybody's coming to us saying, help me, how do I figure out how to keep my chickens? I love them. And so there's this interesting balance going on in that space, but between towns trying to figure out what to do with it, Act 250, Section 248, stormwater utilities are charging farms.
Interesting.
Some of this, like the universal recycling law, like how much imports are you taking? If you take too many imports, you're no longer a farm. And so we're just constantly getting bombarded at this point with, am I farming? I need to know this so that I can deal with X, Y, or Z, accessory on-farm business. And so it's been just constant, and it was something we never envisioned was going to be as rampant as it is, but it's consumed an enormous amount of our capacity in the last year. So, and then there's just one more thing.
Just to end on a more positive note, in 2020, our team received a $7 million award from USDA to offer a new program called Vermont Paper Performance Program.
Yeah.
This is an innovative program that uses environmental modeling to look at field by field phosphorus losses on farms and provide performance-based payments for Vermont farms. So we are 1 year into that program. Over the course of 4 years, about $5 million with additional federal funding will be available for Vermont farms that meet certain stewardship thresholds above and beyond what's required for regulatory purposes. But we're very excited about that program. It is the first time farms have the ability to see on their own operation their field by field losses, as well as to compare that to state water quality goals. So a new tool in our conservation toolbox.
So like Ryan
So
mentioned this
you
morning.
work with Ryan on that?
Well, he's doing whole ecosystem services, right?
Yeah.
This is literally looking at how much phosphorus did you reduce on your farm? So it's alternative to pay for the pounds of reduction of phosphorus.
Now, do you check what a farmer buys for fertilizer? Because
The
I've
nutrient
heard a
balance.
lot of farmers buy very little phosphorus anymore.
Yes.
You know, they have their soil tests to go by, so they go by that, and that's what they try to buy. Is that accurate, or?
Thank you for the prompt. The really awesome part about this program is that we are utilizing place-based geospatial information. So it's looking at specific soil type. You're entering data such as your soil test for that field, which gets updated regularly. You're looking at manure test values, manure application rates on each individual field, as well as what crop and potential crop yield and nutrient uptake you're having from that. So it's on a field by field basis, looking at all of the data that farms do right through their land management, comparing that to the actual soil type, the actual location of that field, and providing the farmer with a sense of where they can target their conservation efforts to have the most impact. So where can they spend more money in conservation on a field to have the best impact in terms of reducing phosphorus runoff.
So they're still using a little bit of fertilizer and it identifies they don't need it and that they can reduce it and get a payment for it. This will show it to them.
Is, I was over at Red Shappets, this summer sometime, and he showed me the letter from his agronomist, and a lot of his field, he does manure injection and broad spraying, and some of his fields that he was a lot of them, he could cut his fertilizer, commercial fertilizer, in half.
Buying it, could cut it in half because he has
Because
the
he's
the
doing
residue.
these
Yeah.
Probably a lot of it's
up-to-date
nitrogen, which is not
practices,
using nitrogen as much.
and, he's just one of many big farms or farmers that can afford to do that kind of stuff.
As a farmer mentioned to me last week at a meeting, we've been studying and looking at data from cows for, a decade, 2 decades. And now we're really in the space where we can look at that level of information about individual fields and areas within fields that are causing a concern or contributing in a beneficial way to.
See, the other thing a lot of the phosphorus comes in through feeds, I've understood, commercial feed. Well, of course, it goes through the animal, the feed does, and what comes out the other end has got a lot of phosphorus in it. And so I don't know who's keeping track of that or not keeping track of it, but it's something somebody's gonna have to pay attention to.
Yeah, well, on the regulatory side, it's kept track of by sampling the manure, but there are efforts to try and reduce it, and you can share that.
There are some initiatives called whole farm nutrient balance, which is looking at grain imports versus crop uptake versus phosphorus from your manure, basically to look at the overall balances coming in and going off the farms. It's a pretty new initiative, but it's led by UVM Extension.
Yeah, so Heather's been studying feed and diets and trying to work with people to really assess it for a couple of years. And it's a space that it's difficult. There's not really that many financial resources. We try and provide financial resources, and it's really time intensive to be able to work with a farmer to gather that information and do it. But she's been doing it.
And I don't know, hey, Diane, you and EB, we kept you on all morning, haven't gotten to you. Is there, and we're running out of time, is there another day that we have
Will
the
be-
secretary coming
Tomorrow
tomorrow?
morning,
At what time?
9 to 10:30.
Is there, could you
If-
guys come back tomorrow morning with the secretary or?
Sure, Senator, we'd be glad to work with Linda to see if we can fit that in. I can't speak to EB's schedule, but we'll figure it out. And that also Laura Ginsburg was coming in, so it'd be all dairy. Three folks on
Yeah,
dairy
that-
and,
Well, sorry, but we're running out of time. We should have started earlier, I guess.
well, you have to start at 5:30 in the morning, Senator Starr, farmer hours.
I'll have Linda get in contact with you.
Sure, that'll be fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So,
you.
Laura, what has somebody analyzed feed you know, we keep hearing, well, there's a lot of this phosphorus is coming in through the feed that farmers are, commercial feed that they're buying. What does phosphorus, what part of the feed does the phosphorus produce, or, you know,
Well, it's a fundamental building block of everything, right? We all have phosphorus in it and it's necessary to grow. So it's within the feed.
so it's just part of the wheat or part of the oats or part of
I'll-
the corn?
Go ahead.
Is,
So I think
did
that
you
the
have
other,
something on that, Diane?
yeah, you're going back into my old degree in animal science, it was ruminant nutrition. So I know this stuff. Yeah, it's in all the feed because plants take it up. So it's going to be in the grain, but what they've really been looking at is a nutrient package. So vitamins and minerals for the cows.
Yeah.
And so in the past, it was thought you needed a lot of phosphorus in that vitamin and mineral pack to make sure the cow's reproductive system worked well. But now they're figuring out they can, shrink that back to almost zero because it's in the plants. And so that's been a lot of the focus of research is how do you reduce this mineral pack, the vitamin and mineral pack to the animals so it doesn't really need phosphorus in it. And it took a lot of convincing. When you make a change like that, you got to convince everybody that it's not going to have any impact on the cows. So it's been over time and they're really moving toward that of reducing that phosphorus. But, if grain comes from somewhere else and they don't have the same environmental requirements that we do, then they're not really working to reduce their phosphorus in the grain that they grow. So, that's a hard one to get that level to come down when we can't control what happens on farms outside of Vermont. But it has been that vitamin and mineral package been the thing they've been focusing on in the past to reduce that phosphorus.
Well, I think you folks have got a pretty well-rounded team over there to manage and look after the best interests of our Vermont agriculture. And that seems to be, it's really important, and you have some younger folks coming along that are of course interested, or they wouldn't be there in the first place, and it's good to see that you've got a pretty darn good handle on things. It's just too bad that more people couldn't sit through a meeting like this morning and publicize it more, because a lot of times we get bad rap, so we aren't doing it right, not doing enough, and it should have been done, 10 years ago. But anyways, it was really a great morning, and certainly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
we
no, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to finally have resources, because I got beat up doing this job saying everything we're doing is wrong when I had very few resources to do the job. So it is, you can see what can happen when you put resources to it.
Well, hopefully we'll get enough money to continue working. So thank you, and thank you all for coming, and pass that on to the others, Diane, that we really appreciate their time.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. Thank you for having
And
us this
we'll
morning.
try to catch up with you and EB tomorrow with the big guns.
Will do.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being with us, both of you.
Yeah.
So we'll adjourn the meeting, and if the committee, if you have follow-up, suggestions on certain people
Sure.
coming back and.
I have a new person. You
Pardon?
said to remind you about the food bank. The food bank had contacted at least one of
Yeah,
us.
we've
Did-
got to get them in.
So I'm just reminding you, since you said to remind you, but they're eager to speak with us as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and no, it's important our food systems is very important, but if you don't keep that land open and
That's right.
healthy and well, we aren't gonna have any food anyway, so.
Let's keep the
Amen.
plastic and the PFAS. off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we gotta keep that plastic. I don't know what the heck we're gonna do with
Can you
that.
send us a little video of how that